McLain, Jim McLain, or all through my air service, everybody called me Mac. I was in 389th Bomb Group, 2nd Air Division, with the 8th Air Force in England, arriving there in June of 1943, leaving there in September of 1944.
What were you doing before the war?
I was a student. I was a student in the morning at a local college called Iowa State Teachers College. In the afternoons and evenings, I worked at a meatpacking plant in Waterloo, Iowa, in order to afford to go to college. And my intent at that time was to get in the 2 years of college. Half the credits necessary for a degree in order to join the aviation cadets to become a pilot. I wasn't doing too well scholastically, and in fact had been suspended for 1 quarter. When I returned then after that absence in December, the quarter began December 1st of 1941. And of course, 7 days later, the whole world changed, and including that the Air Corps reduced its requirements for aviation cadet training from these half the credits necessary for a college degree. They changed it to simply a high school graduation diploma, and subject to passing a battery of tests. About 3 days of scholastic tests of various sorts, and the physicals, of course. And so I was successful in passing that. So by March of 42, I was on a train headed for Kellyfield, Texas, which was what they call the basic training area for pilot training. Sent on to Garner Field in Uvalde, Texas for primary flight training, and much to my sadness, I was washed out. And from there I went to a pre-flight navigation school at Houston, Texas, and from there to advanced navigation, aerial navigation and training at Hondo, Texas, Hondo Air Corps Base at Hondo, Texas. A community of tar paper shacks thrown up as they did in a number of cases to facilitate the training of flying officers, and I managed to become an aerial navigator, graduating at the end of January of 1943, commissioned a second lieutenant. I was still 19 years old. From there, we went to, various numbers of us were sent off to Salt Lake City for reassignment, and a number of us ended up, about 7 of us ended up, I'm talking 7 of us from my graduating class at Hondo, Texas, ended up in the 389th Bomb Group, which was being formed at Davis-Monthan Field in Tucson, Arizona. That was what you might say, our first phase of combat training. Then we moved to Biggs Field in El Paso, Texas, for second phase, and there our crew, which was headed by a pilot by the name of Robert Lee Wright, we got our 10th man, which was our co-pilot, Fred Sayre. The group was then moved to Lowry Field in Denver, Colorado for third phase of combat training, which was concluded at the end of May of 1943. We then moved to Lincoln. We didn't move to, went over to Lincoln, Nebraska, got our brand new B-24 aircraft, and from there in stages to Bangor, Maine, to Gander Lake, Newfoundland, where we jumped off for our flight to Prestwick, Scotland. Terrible storm over the Atlantic that night, but we managed to get to Prestwick. It was rather remarkable. We were first the pilot was trying to get under the storm, and that brought us down close enough to the surface that I was able to get wind readings from the whitecaps, and that told me that the wind had changed slightly, the beam, so that we weren't getting as much push from the tailwind as we had been predicted. So I took a little bit off at the estimated time of arrival, and then later on trying to get over the storm, and we did break out, and I was able to get a moonshot, which is probably the least reliable of any sort of celestial navigation, but it sort of confirmed my earlier findings of the wind direction. And so I added 30 minutes to the ETA, and it came out right on the nose. The next week I found my log posted on the bulletin board in the ready room at Bethel. Anyhow, we landed at Prestwick, Scotland, stayed overnight there. There we were briefed on flying conditions in England, particularly with regard to pilotage, recognizing landmarks. It was short, but fairly informative. To somebody from the United States, to a large extent, the terrain in England or the geography looked all the same. You know, the hedgerows and so forth. It lacked the really distinguishing features because sailing over Texas or Oklahoma or wherever, the landmarks tend to stand out more clearly. But anyhow, we adapted pretty quick. And so on June 22nd of 1943, we landed at Bethel, which I think was roughly 10 miles or so southwest of Norwich. And at that point in time, we were the third B-24 bomb group in England.
And what were your first impressions of Norfolk and Bethel and the people there?
Favorable. We didn't have much immediate contact because we were busy being indoctrinated and getting things organized. Our ground echelon had not yet arrived, so we were pretty much on our own. Certain elements of our ground elements had arrived, the medical people being one of them. But we, right away, we were involved in training, and including low-level flying, which the pilots dearly loved because it gave us a chance to show off, but didn't make us too welcome with the populace. They were flying at like 50 feet off the ground. But this was all in preparation for a mission that we knew nothing about. We sort of speculated that perhaps we were going to be going in to bomb submarine cannons on the coast of Europe or something like that, trying to maybe bombing dams like the British, the RAF were doing or would do at the time frame. speculation of why we're doing this low-level flying. So before we'd even flown one combat mission, we were informed that we were leaving for North Africa. And so July 1st, we headed down to Land's End, and then the next day down southward across the western edge of the Bay of Biscay to Gibraltar, through Gibraltar to Iran, where we overnighted at a French air base, and then on to our base outside of Benghazi in Libya, a desert, pure desert base that has been scraped out of the sand. Pretty primitive, lived in tents, put up with the heat and the sand and the dust storms and all that. Where do we take it from here? You asked me about the people of England. There really wasn't much time to be making judgments. I remember one thing, and I don't mean this as a criticism, but I noticed that people's teeth were not, didn't look as healthy as the teeth we've been used to in the States. And someone explained to me that it was some sort of dietary deficiency, perhaps brought about by the restrictions in diet that the war had brought on. Because you have to remember, people of Britain had been in this war now for several years by the time we arrived in 1943, and at it for, 4 or 5 years. And it was understandable. I suppose perhaps had to do with maybe a lowered incidence of milk consumption, calcium and so forth. Anyhow, I don't mean that as a criticism, just something I noticed that the number of people didn't have what you call good teeth.
Okay. Let's speak a little bit about your first mission then.
First mission?
Yeah.
Out of Africa. Okay. It was supposed to be a so-called milk run, or just something to give us the experience, not an unusual practice. So we took off, just our bomb group. I think it was the total complement. There were 9 bombers per squadron at that point in time. So if we'd had a maximum effort out of our group, it would have been 36 aircraft. But I think just again, due to mechanical problems and so forth, there were only, I believe, 32 aircraft. And our target was a German air base on the island of Crete, which was supposedly just a German air base. No particular, it would just go do some, maybe a nuisance and do some bombing and get back home. Well, we were greeted by no less than 30 Me-109s, a German Messerschmitt fighter, all over the sky. In other words, they almost had one fighter for every bomber. And they did shoot down one of our crews. So we got an early, shall we say, a higher level of training than we expected all of a sudden. The gunners claimed 5 victories. That's a little bit open to dispute, but yes, I know I did see some fighters going down, but being a navigator in the nose of an aircraft, you don't see what's happening in that. So
what went through your mind then? This was supposed to be, as you said, a milk run.
Yeah.
And then when you got there, everything seemed to go wrong.
Well, it was just that we were faced with opposition we didn't expect. We might have expected maybe 3 or 4 fighters, something like that. This was on, this was July 9th, 1943. Later on, the explanation, of course, was that the Germans had seen over in the western Mediterranean all this armada of ships and naval vessels and so forth, indicating that there was some invasion effort coming, and they surmised that it was to be Greece. And that's the reason that all these German fighters were deployed to this island in Crete that normally wouldn't have been there. So it was just an accidental milk run that got sour.
But when you saw the sky filled with the German fighters, were you scared, or did you have time?
Sort of, yeah. Kind of wow, all of a sudden. On a B-24, at that time they had what they called a greenhouse nose, and there were 350 caliber machine guns mounted in the nose, 2 angle off the side, 1 straight ahead. So between the navigator and bombardier, we were expected to also be gunners. And so yes, I was shooting that day. I didn't have any reason to claim any fighters. But it was sort of a rude awakening. Oh, this is war. Well, then, so that was the 9th. So on the 2 days later, 2 days later on the 11th, we were dispatched to bomb the marshalling yards at Reggio di Calabria, Italy, the city right on the toe of Italy up against Sicily. And we still didn't know about the invasion. But the reason was, of course, they were trying to disrupt the flow of materials into Sicily. And that was a relatively easy mission. Good bombing results, and things went well, and no losses. And few fighters who weren't aggressive. Perhaps they were Italian. So that day went well. The very next day, on the 12th of July, they sent us back to Reggio, whichever, to bomb the ferry slips. To again do the briefing officer at the conclusion of his presentation, as he was walking off the platform, turned and said, "Oh, by the way, the Allies have begun the invasion of Sicily the night before last." That's all he said. And so, okay. Now again, we bombed 12,000 feet. And the anti-aircraft fire that day was intense and accurate, and our plane got severely hit. Our number 1 engine was out, our number 2 engine was out. Our number 2 engine was pulling half power, number 3 engine was out, and number 4 engine was pulling full power. Well, this is enough to keep a B-24 aloft. So I immediately gave the pilot a heading for Malta, and we proceeded south. Fortunately, again, what few fighters were in the air didn't press attacks. So we began throwing out all excess weight that we could, anything and everything. One of the waist gunners who kind of went berserk, you might say, whatever. In the B-24s, there was a small aluminum potty riveted to the floor by these 4 points. And it was for emergency use when necessary. He put his arms around this body was riveted to the floor and literally ripped from the floor and threw it out the waist window. He was so panic-stricken. He was a big, strong fellow, but that was amazing. He could tear that thing off the floor and throw it out. By the same token, when the engineer of the crew came through the bomb bay and handed his Thompson submachine gun, the engineer on the crew was the only one who was equipped with that weapon. But he meant for this fellow, just, keep this back here for me. Gunner turned around and threw that out the window too, much to the engineer's dismay. But anyhow, by the time we reached the southern tip of Sicily, by my calculations, it was evident that we were not going to be able to get to Malta before we would be in the water. This calls for a little backstepping here. Our pilot, Bob Wright, devoured all the information he could get about the B-24 aircraft. There were 4 what they called tech manuals, thick books, covering various subjects. He read every page of those 4 manuals. I can remember, for example, backtracking to Hethel, our early arrival in Hethel. One day, the bombardier and myself were going into Norwich. We stuck our head in the door of the room that the pilot and co-pilot shared. Bob Wright was lying on the bunk reading one of these tech manuals. It was a nice summer day. Why don't you come on into town with us, Bob? Oh, you guys go ahead. I'm busy. So at any rate, he had determined from his intense study of B-24s that it was, for all practical purposes, no hope in attempting to ditch a B-24 due to the way the airplane was constructed. Remember, a B-24 had these corrugated doors that came down. Well, that's all there were. There was virtually no support or strengthening of it. So what would happen when the plane hit the water, that would just crush those doors, and the water would slam up against the rear bulkhead and rip the rear section of the plane in half, in most cases. That's what's going to happen. So anyhow, Bob Wright had gathered the crew together one day and explained in better fashion than I have the reason he was going to tell us. He said, if we are coming back from the continent and this aircraft is so severely damaged that I don't believe it's going to be able to get across the North Sea to our base in England, I'm going to turn around and order everybody to bail out. Because it's better to live and come back and fight another day than to take a chance in ditching. So, okay, now here we are, sometime later over the Mediterranean, which of course is a better and more hospitable body of water than the North Sea, but nevertheless, it was understood we would not attempt to ditch. So I said, well, perhaps we can land on the beach in Sicily, because beaches tend to be pretty solid enough to take it. So as we turned the corner of southeastern Sicily and looked down this beach, there was no place to land. There were various types of naval vessels in these landing craft tanks, landing ship tanks, and trucks, and big piles of materials on the beach. There was no place to set down. So we were still losing altitude, and we drifted inland about 15 miles and saw a plowed field on a hillside downward sloping from our position. The plowed crosswise. So anyhow, putting the landing gear down, we went and letting down with the last bit of power we had. He did an unbelievably superb job of landing the aircraft. We went bouncing down this hillside, and it was boom, 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 and there was a road at the bottom of the hill with a ditch on either side, and we went careening across the road and the ditches, and it tore off the nose wheel, so that the B-24 ended up like so. But nobody was hurt severely. There were bumps and bruises, but there was no serious fractures or anything like that. So we gathered outside the airplane and we were talking about, okay, what do we do now? Because we don't know where we are, that is from the standpoint of, is this enemy-held territory, or we assumed it was, in as much as we'd come in inland as far as we had, and the invasion had just literally begun a day and a half before. So while we're having this little discussion, in this matter of minutes, we hear gunshots and bullets whistling over our head. Coming down this hill that we just landed on was a group of maybe 20 peasants. It's got strung out. They were walking down this hill towards us, and we immediately thought they were the ones who were shooting at us. So the pilot, momentarily losing his usual good sense, he says, Richie being the tail gunner, Richie, get back up in that turret and let those bastards have it. Richie says, I can't, sir. Why not? Because I threw out all the ammunition, sir.